going to be a fun session, so feel free to say hello, Regina.
Hi everyone, good to be joining this one today.
And just to let everybody know that it is being recorded and will be available after today's webinar. The other thing I just wanted to ask is, in the waiting room there was a checklist that was available for data breaches. Did everyone see that and download it? If they felt it was useful, of course. Feel free.
If they missed it, then it is available on our website if it's something that you wanted to download and miss the opportunity to do so.
Cool. Right, let's kick off, Regina.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've launched our Eleanor Roosevelt series on learning from data breaches. Some of you may have seen that today Ticketmaster have been fined £1.25 million, and we will discuss that in another episode going forward. But today we are going to focus on the Marriott and the BA fines. So a little bit about me, then Regina will introduce herself. I am the co-founder of Data Basics. I'm very passionate about data protection. Some of you will know that because you'd have experienced one of these webinars or have met me in person when I've delivered data protection services. And I've been doing this for quite some time. Regina.
Yep, and so I've worked with Kelly. Obviously, I'm the other co-founder, and we've worked together in Data Basics for 7 years now. Yesterday was our 7th birthday, and we've worked together for 15 years on data management, data protection, and Kelly has enthused me for all things data protection, and I really enjoy being able to translate it into things and actions that people can take forward in their own businesses.
Cool. So let's talk about this. So I'm going to talk about British Airways, and Regina's then going to talk about the Marriott. And the way that we've done this is that we're going to describe the breach to you. We're then going to talk about, we've each drawn 3 lessons from the breach. And then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask us any questions or anything that you're uncertain about. So if I can just ask you to hold off your questions for the moment, that'd be fantastic. So British Airways had an incident in September, or it became apparent in September 2018 that British Airways had a cyber attack. It hit all the news, not just in this country, but globally. So you can only imagine the kind of the panic that was going on at British Airways and the kind of PR machine that had to start working in terms of managing the kind of notification of this breach. So the breach essentially took place, it was a cyber attack, it took place between June and September of 2018, and it resulted in, more than 400,000 customer details being compromised. BA only became aware of this breach from a third party. So someone actually told them that it had happened. And then within 90 minutes of them being told, they notified the Information Commissioner. So in terms of their responsiveness, British Airways done really well in terms of assessing the risk and realizing they had to notify the Commissioner. Obviously, the challenge is they didn't know that it was happening until they were told. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about the details of the breaches. So this breach for British Airways actually started in the supply chain, and there is a theme between some of the breaches that we're going to talk about today and in the future. So in a company in Trinidad and Tobago, there was a single password admin account. So the attacker was able to compromise sysadmin by obtaining the name, email, and password. They were then able to navigate their way through and find access to the Citrix remote access gateway. And essentially they broke through that. And when they broke through that, they got access to the wider connection of British Airways supply chain, which you can only imagine is pretty terrifying. This then actually led them to looking around. If anyone's done any reading about how cyber attacks work, they are constantly weaving and trying to find ways through different systems to ultimately get the data that is really juicy. And in this instance, it was customer data, which we've talked about, which included things like passport information. There was credit card details. And ultimately, by acquiring this information, they then went and compromised the British Airways website. And they essentially redirected someone from British Airways to a malicious site where they were then acquiring the payment details. So quite a sophisticated attack over quite a period of time that affected a significant number of people. So I think just by this alone, you can see how interesting this breach is, and there are many things that we can learn from it. Hopefully you never experience this. So when I read through the enforcement notice, and if you want to read it, it's 90 pages. It is quite an interesting read. But I drew out 3 key things. So the first one is multi-factor authentication. Now, why has this been drawn out? Well, if you look at the very first instance of where this breach actually started, it started because of a single access to a login and a password. So there was no prompt to verify who they were. So British Airways were challenged about their level of multi-factor authentication across the entire network. So it wasn't just what they were responsible, it was for where they are engaging with supply chain. Has the supply chain put in the necessary measures to prevent access into British Airways? So that's quite a key takeaway. So my point to anyone that's listening here is, if you are using multiple suppliers as a way of being able to process bookings or take payment, and if they are compromised, they can ultimately get to you. In your contracts, what have you put in place to not demand as such, but kind of obtain confidence that they are trying to protect your data as best as possible? Now, the ICO in their report referred to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and essentially their guidance is that you should use multi-factor authentication whenever possible, especially when it comes to your most sensitive data. This is assuming that you know all the data that you are processing, but one takeaway is, please look at your supply chain and look at multi-factor authentication. So really not surprising is the fact that the next lesson I really want to draw upon is the ICO notification process. And why this? Well, not just through this, but in previous breaches, the ICO has said it typically takes a company significantly longer than 72 hours to actually notify them of the breach. Now you might say, well, hold up a second, they told the ICO within 90 minutes. Maybe so, but they was still had to be told by a third party that this breach had happened. And the breach actually started to happen in June. So the ICO was wrapped him over the knuckles and said, actually, these are the things that we want to see in the future. So your penalty, if you get to this far ahead in the journey, could be reduced if you promptly notify the Information Commissioner. So that means that you need to have a robust breach process in place where you know that a breach has happened and you're able to assess whether or not it needs to be reported to the Commissioner. Absolutely cooperate fully with the ICO during the investigation. It works in your favour to do so. Make sure that during that investigation you take all reasonable steps to mitigate the losses to data subjects. And you would have seen from this breach, it included customers' passport details. There was details about their name and their email address. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you're able to put measures in place that can prevent the loss. And it's about emotional, financial distress that you need to be considering at this point in time, and that you really need to be committing to continued program of IT security improvements I think what this breach has in common with a lot of other breaches that have happened is that it's not just a one-off update to systems. You need to constantly looking at ways of improving the security that you have. And some of us don't have the kind of the legal support that British Airways have, because obviously the other way of being able to reduce your fine is being able to have strong legal representation that can argue your point about what you have in place to reduce the fine from the mouth-watering £183 million to the £20 million they ended up being. Still a staggering amount of money, to be perfectly honest. And then the final lesson, really, and I think this is one where we're going to see a lot more of this in the future in terms of where fines come from, is really understanding the security risk of your entire supply chain. So this breach started in the supply chain. So you, as data controllers, so where you've decided to outsource processing or storage or recording of data, you need to be putting in place measures to reduce your risk. So are you assessing the different contracts that you have with the different suppliers? What is the risk associated with them? What is the one that's going to keep you up at night the most? Therefore, what mitigations in the contract are you going to put in place? Such as, have you done any due diligence on these suppliers? You know, have they had breaches in the past? What do they do in terms of respecting your personal data that they are processing? How can they evidence to you their accountability to the General Data Protection Regulation? In any data processing agreement, and you should have a data processing agreement with any supplier that's processing data on your behalf, do you put the requirement that you will do audits of them? So you will conduct an audit of their compliance. Have you, and this lesson was, mapped out your entire supply chain? So not just who you use, but do they then use sub-processors? Because they all become part of your ultimate supply chain. And really put in exit kind of points where if they don't comply, what will your arrangements be to cease that relationship with them and get back the data that is owned by you? So there are some really nice lessons that can be learned from this. And I think these are all ones that you can apply into your business, because very few companies today don't have a supply chain. And certainly a lot of us use cloud-based solutions. So we should be thinking about these type of plans, because the ICO will be looking for them if you are to be investigated. So that's my whistle-stop tour of the British Airways breach and lessons. And I'm going to let Regina take over and talk about the Marriott breach.
Excellent, thank you, Kelly. That was all really interesting, and I think we'll see some common themes coming through between the two. So just to run through what happened with Marriott, and I think this is interesting because obviously it's connected to two companies in a way, but obviously Marriott are the ones that have actually received the fine. So back in 2014, a group of hotels, Starwood Hotels and Resorts, they were victims of a cyber attack. And essentially what happened was an individual, they rumoured it's connected to Chinese intelligence, but whether or not that's true, that's never been proven. But essentially a malicious individual was able to install code on a device in one of the Starwood Hotels chains, and through that code and malware were able to get access as a privileged user onto the systems. And then, because they're now a privileged user, could take control of the systems and introduce, basically get access to all the data and the information that was stored on those systems, and be accessing that for quite some time. Clearly, it says it's 4 years worth of time, because during that time, Marriott then purchased Starwood Hotels. They acquired them, and it came to light in September 2018, so after the purchase, that this attack had happened, and that's the point at which Marriott became aware of it. Now you can look and see, obviously, hotels, a worldwide chain. It's effectively the number of records there that have been potentially compromised is huge. 339 million guest records across the world. So that's a phenomenal amount of data that those individuals will have had access to. And similarly, it was kind of that sensitive data that you share when you're going to hotels. So again, card payment information, potentially VIP guest status, and that type of thing, which I'll come on to in a second. Marriott did notify the ICO, and unlike BA, they took a little bit longer. So when they became fully aware of the breach, it was then a further 2 months until November 2018 that they actually then notified the Information Commissioner about the fact that the breach had happened. So as I just said, the data included things like names, email addresses, there was passport information again, there was arrival and departure information, it included any loyalty programs individuals have been part of, and yes, as you know, they actually got access to the systems, they were able to take control of the systems, they had that privileged user status, and again were able to look around and get access to that data, and this is then over a period of 4 years, which is significant, and included then that change of ownership from Starwood to Marriott, which probably thrilled them because they were then able to get access not just to Starwood but to then the Marriott systems as those were pulled through. So what do we want to pull out from this one? When I read through the report, it was really interesting that actually the ICO indicated that they weren't impressed by the delay in notification from the point at which Marriott became aware. So it was 2 months. I think Marriott, using their legal team, again, they've got a big legal team like BA, and the process for the two has been fairly similar and the timeline's pretty aligned. They did go down a big legal challenge from their original fine, resulting in it being substantially reduced. I think it was about 80 or 90 million to begin with and got reduced to 18.4. Marriott were trying to argue that they needed to be reasonably certain that there was a personal data breach that had happened, i.e. that the data had been used and accessed, whereas the ICO said you need to say that it's likely that a data breach has occurred, and actually it is likely. So you don't have to be certain that the data has been accessed. It's the likelihood and potential risk that those individuals will be harmed. So that's something really good to consider. But what they did recognise was the way in which Marriott had enabled the potential for data subjects who could have been affected to actually engage with them, and they'd used multiple approaches. So I think things to think about there is, if you were to ever be experiencing breaches, how would you engage with the people who've been affected? What are the different mechanisms? So you don't just rely on one way of telling them, but you're making sure that you're giving as much opportunity for A, for them to be aware of what's occurred, and B, for them to engage with you, ask questions, and get that kind of protection on an ongoing basis. So the things that the ICO recognised have been good was that they did create a bespoke website, and actually that was in multiple languages due to the global nature of the incident. So they were enabling people to easily understand the messages that were being given out. Obviously, emails were sent directly to data subjects where they had those addresses to make sure that people were fully aware. They did establish a call centre and a phone line so that it would be easy for people to contact them. There was a note that they didn't include that number in the email that went out to data subjects, so that could have improved. So again, it's thinking about that cross level of information and making sure that you're including everything when you're contacting people. And I believe that there were well over, certainly in the UK, I think it was about 60,000 calls to that dedicated hotline. And then they did provide free monitoring services to those people who had been affected. So you can get reports, and people will monitor your credit ratings and where your data is appearing and if there's anything weird that's happening with your information. And they provided that service to affected data subjects for free. And I think that was seen as a positive thing by the ICO, that they had been good in the way that they approached supporting affected data subjects, but that they needed to improve on the speed with which they'd reported it in the first instance, and make sure that in their communications, they'd included all the information that was necessary to make it easy for data subjects to understand and connect with them. For me, this is a key one, and maybe at the moment, particularly where we might be seeing some businesses who look to acquire others in the sort of aftermath of COVID, and see opportunities for growing their business through acquiring other businesses that are linked, that there needs to be a real thorough due diligence. And I think when people discuss due diligence, often they will think very much of the finances, the way in which the business is set up, the structures, how things have been done. And I think potentially, and in this case very clearly, data and systems were not looked at or examined thoroughly. The ICO were very clear that Marriott were clearly unaware of the fact that this breach had happened, was ongoing, and that their systems, the systems of the company that they were buying, had been compromised. And so the recommendation is very much that you need to have that plan in place, involve cybersecurity professionals, whether they're your own professionals, whether you bring them in to help look at what it is that you're purchasing or acquiring, that, you know, what are the systems in place? Are those robust? Have they got appropriate, as Kelly was saying with BA, but have they got the appropriate technical security in place that means that their systems have been protected over time? And where's the risk to your business and your reputation in acquiring that other business? You know, it's Marriott's name that is being linked with the fine here. It's not Starwood, and probably you know, I'd never heard of Starwood before this, but you know, Marriott are the ones who've purchased them, are an ongoing brand, and their name is being affected, as well as their finances and their business. So it's very important that at that point of acquiring another business, that you're going through the data and the systems and the measures that have been in place, and engaging with people who can actually help you do that. The other recommendation was to look at making sure that appropriate cyber insurance is in place. I think this is a market that is increasing, and it's certainly something we've talked about with our partners in the insurance industry before, that, you know, cyber insurance is there and can help you in circumstances, either through the process of acquisition, but also then if you are subject to a breach and, you know, you experience this, you've then got support and help, both from the PR perspective, from helping to manage some of the costs. It doesn't pay the fine for you, but it can help you manage some of the associated costs with dealing with a data breach. So that was certainly something that the ICO were recommending. And again, I think then it's the same kind of themes that came through from BA in terms of, you know, it was an ongoing attack. You know, BA was 3 months, this was 4 years. You know, if you've got technical security measures in place, it's about having the ability to monitor those technical measures as well. You know, looking at if you've got different account permissions, which you should have, and there are privileged accounts, that routine check about, are they still the right people accessing the right data that they need to? If there's weird activity, why is that happening? Is it a sign that there's been a breach of the systems? Who, you know, is it somebody that's known? And again, in a global organization, that can be difficult to manage, but it is about being very clear that the people that you can see have access to privileged and sensitive information are the ones who should do. Have, again, I imagine something around the idea of multi-factor authentication that wasn't actually flagged as a factor here, but, you know, who is accessing what? What's the data that's being accessed and why? Is there an increase in access to personal and sensitive information? And, you know, is that a known actor? Is it somebody that's within your business? You know, this was external, but if it's somebody that's within your business and they could be doing nefarious activities with that data because of their own personal benefit, you would see that quicker. An additional protection is obviously encryption, and they were clear that some of the credit card information had been encrypted, which was positive. However, things like identifiable information as passport, and some of the other information that could have been encrypted wasn't. And so I think it's that real question about what's necessary to encrypt and what's the risk of the data that you're collecting, and not to just dismiss it as something that it doesn't matter. It's thinking about, if this were to be breached, would we feel more comfortable if that data was encrypted? Would it add a level of security that makes it less interesting for the potential bad actor to be looking at, or make it harder for them to actually access that information. And again, then you're able to demonstrate as a business that you've taken every step to protect that personal data, and that it hasn't been something that you've just let sit there. So I think between the two there's been sort of different types of issues and some similarities in terms of the way in which the people have had access for a longer period of time. And also then there's kind of been a bit of a laissez-faire attitude towards the data's there, and I'm sure it's fine, as opposed to that active ongoing monitoring of making sure that the data's secure and that it's not being accessed by people that it shouldn't, whether they're internal or external. And I think that's a really good lesson for businesses to learn, because I think often data buckets can just kind of sit there and build up and start flowing without thinking about it. And again, that sort of active retention and review and monitoring can really be important as an ongoing data protection program and data security program. So that brings us to the end of the summary of what happened and how we think that there are lessons to be learned from these big breaches, and the kinds of things that hopefully you can take back to your own businesses. And at this point, if you've got any questions, that would be really or comments, it'd be really interesting to find out what you think and to share those with us, and we'll do our best to give you some answers.
Yeah, and they can be in relation to what we've covered, or if there's anything that in relation to breaches that you want to cover, please do type in the chat box. We've certainly got the time to do that. And I think we can learn. I think the key for me is that you can learn from breaches. I think that even if you in your organization don't experience anything that of the likes of what Marriott or British Airways have experienced, is ask yourself, if you have breaches, how do you learn from them? How do you take that learning and implement it in your organization? And even if those breaches are really silly, like an email's gone to the wrong person, or you've CC'd people rather than BCC, do you share that back with the team and say, this is how we can learn from that? So these are nice, juicy subjects to talk about, but I think you can learn from any breach that happens in your organization.
Absolutely. And part of the inspiration for this is very much that it is about learning from the mistakes of others. I've said this in training that we've done for years, it's better to learn from the mistakes of others than make the same mistake yourself. And I think in each breach that happens, there will be points that we can draw out that will hopefully help you as business owners or working within charities to make sure that you can do the best without the resources of these kind of companies to actually secure your data as best as you possibly can. And so I'd urge you, the ICO do have reports on any action that they've taken. So if you're interested in looking at those for ones that are related to your own business area, do go and have a little look and review what they've done over the last couple of years. And we'll be pulling out some of the interesting ones. If you've got suggestions you'd like us to cover, then absolutely drop either of us an email, and we'll look to cover those in the next few months, because I think it will be hopefully an interesting series of webinars to do.
Absolutely. So as there doesn't seem to be at the moment any questions, we'll just briefly touch on what we can do. So if for any reason you have a breach and you're not sure how to handle that, we can provide a rapid response to that, and we have provided that level of support to some of our clients. If you want an external review of policies and procedures, if you want an audit of your compliance, or if you want to provide training, we have a managing data breaches course, but we also have a fundamentals to data protection that could be of interest to your staff. The other thing that we're just about to take forward is our best practice group. It's a free group that we want to make available to folk that engage with us and want to learn about data protection. So if you are interested in being a member of our best practice group, there is no charge for that. Please type in the chat box, and we will follow up specifically with you about that. And then just a few of the freebie stuff that we do have available. We have a weekly podcast that is across all the channels. I think it's on Amazon, Spotify, iTunes, and even Google. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yep.
We have plenty of webinars that we've done in the past that you're able to watch on our website or via our YouTube channel. Keep in touch with us via our website, via email. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we also have some free downloadable questionnaires that you might want to use to apply how compliant you think that you are. So that really brings us to a close, really. So is there anything else that you want to add, Regina?
No, not at the moment. I think you've covered everything there, and I think it was hopefully an interesting topic for people to hear. And if you've got any questions that come to you later, please feel free to contact either one of us. But or any thoughts on what you'd like us to cover in future ones of these, we'd be really happy to discuss them, because we want them to be useful for you to take away and understand how you can best secure your own data.
Absolutely. And if anyone, when you registered, asked for a follow-up call, we will follow up with you after this session. So we will make this recording available to you next week. And yeah, I hope you all have learned something this fabulous lunchtime. Have a fantastic rest of today, and have a great day. And we'll see you again, hopefully, episode 2, when we may discuss the Ticketmaster. So, thank you all very much. Have a great day.